More specifically, how we're gathering student opinion of computer-based testing at the George Washington University, and then using that opinion to inform a full-scale rollout of ExamSoft. First, to give you the context, as Stephanie mentioned, we're undergoing a curriculum reform right now. In a few short weeks, we will be changing from a discipline-based curriculum to an organ systems-based curriculum. So instead of teaching courses like anatomy, pharmacology, and physiology, we'll be teaching all of our content within integrated organ system blocks. As many of you already know, this causes a bit of angst among the faculty as to how to track student performance within the discipline. In other words, to make certain that although a student may have passing scores in cardiovascular, pulmonary, and renal, that they're not failing pharmacology while getting passing scores overall. The other thing that the new curriculum will have is a greater emphasis on formative assessment. The literature tells us that students appreciate formative assessment because it helps them to identify their strengths and weaknesses. Again, with ExamSoft, we can track those strengths and weaknesses at a much more granular level than we would be able to in the previous system of just paper and pencil testing. Unfortunately, with the curriculum reform, that also means we have a number of things changing at once. We also have an iPad initiative that will be rolling out with the new curriculum. With this initiative, we will be giving iPads to all of the incoming first-year students. This makes us certain that all of our students have a portable computing device, that it's the same platform, and has roughly the same software installed on it. Currently, we have a computing requirement, but we do not have a laptop requirement. So if we wanted to have all of our students have access to a computer at the same time, we would need to hold our events in a computer lab that we have on campus, but that computer lab only holds about half of our medical school class at one time. Finally, computer-based testing has been used by the USMLE since 1999, and our feeling was that in the face of that, we're really doing our students a disservice by using paper and pencil testing and not acclimating them to the computer-based testing. Those of you that have heard of cognitive load can put this into terms of the intrinsic cognitive load of the exam being detracted from by the extraneous cognitive load of the platform. If we can get them used to the computer-based testing platform, they have more of their cognitive capacity freed up to focus on the content of the exam. Now, with all of this changing at once, we didn't want to have ExamSoft coming in cold, as it were, so we decided to run a pilot of ExamSoft using the current first-year class. We selected that class because they would also be in the pre-clerkship phase of the curriculum when the new curriculum starts. The first-year students come in and frequently look to their upperclassmen for information on how to study best, what to expect from the exams, what to expect from certain courses. When the curriculum changes, such as ours will, those upper-class students have very little to offer the first-year students in terms of what to expect. By using them for the pilot of ExamSoft, there will at least be one commonality between these two classes and one area where the upperclassmen can reassure the incoming students as to what to expect. We did want the pilot to be in a low-stakes environment that will reduce any test anxiety that goes along with the pilot testing. So this pilot was not counted for a grade in any way, not even participation. The session itself was optional. Now, the session was optional, but the use of ExamSoft within the session was not. So if students opted to come to the session, they needed to use ExamSoft in order to fully participate, but they were not required to come to the session. Before the pilot even happened, we had a mock quiz that was distributed. This was distributed at the time of installation, so about 2 weeks prior to the pilot, we sent an email to all of the students in the first-year class asking them to please download, install, and register ExamSoft, and to take a mock quiz. This quiz had a couple of different purposes. The first was to familiarize the students with the platform. We wanted them to be used to all of the different question types, so the 5 questions of the quiz used every question type available to us. We wanted it to be a short quiz, and in this case it had a mean completion time of about 3 minutes, although there was quite a range from 1 to 10 minutes. And this also allowed us to verify the number of students who had seen the user interface prior to the pilot. As an evaluator, I can say it also allowed us to collect evaluation data. We asked questions about their computer use, their preference for computers in terms of further assessments. We asked them to estimate, compared to a paper-based assessment, how quick or how fast they could complete an assessment on computer. And we also asked them in an open-ended format what their greatest concern about computer-based testing was. Of the 188 students in the class, this mock quiz was downloaded by 102 and completed by 98, in other words, 52% of the class. So following this 2-week period where they had to do the mock quiz, we had the pilot quiz. This took place during a physiology exam review session. This was not the first of these sessions. The students had had them before, so it was an in-class session and a very familiar format to them. What would happen is prior to the examinations in physiology, and the examinations occurred every organ system, the students would come together in class and they would have 45 minutes to complete a 10-question quiz, previously on paper and pencil, and for the pilot done with ExamSoft. These questions and their answers would then be used for the remainder of the time in an instructor-led review prior to the examination. The review session was optional, and historically about half of the class attends. In our case, we had the pilot quiz downloaded by 151 students and completed by 120. So we had 64% completion, which is a little better attendance than we normally would have expected. We ran into a number of issues, though, with the original pilot. As you can see here, we had 120 students complete the pilot, but only 98 of them had downloaded and completed the mock quiz. That meant that we had a minimum of 22 students who had no prior experience with the user interface. Many of these students, we found out at the time, had not downloaded the software, installed it, or downloaded the assessment. So we had about a 15-minute delay getting started just to get everyone registered and everything installed and everyone into the assessment before we could begin. As I mentioned, we had 45 minutes allotted for the quiz. The mean completion time was 23 minutes, which really pushes us right up against that limit. But the range was 7 to 43 minutes. Of course, there are some students who come in, take a look at the questions, and don't bother even trying to answer. But the students who really wanted to spend time with it, some of them were cut off by the lecture-led review part. The other issue that, or one of the other issues that came up, was students that had downloaded the survey or the assessment but didn't show up in class to complete it, those 31 students. We had students who were in class who were requesting to share the exam password with students who were not in class. This is something we hadn't thought of previously. We wanted this pilot assessment to be a real true test of how this was going to work as a summative assessment. So we had the assessment password protected and in a secure environment. We hadn't thought about the fact that passwords could be shared. This is when we came up with the remote deletion option that ExamSoft has available, so that these assessments, if they're downloaded but not completed during the window available, they're remotely deleted. And then finally, another issue that came up with students really wanted scratch paper or something to write on. We found this out in the open-ended questions during the initial evaluation, but this was something students really felt adamant about. For the purpose of a low-stakes pilot, we just gave them paper to use, and that was not an issue. But it got us thinking, in a summative assessment where we want a secure environment, we're not going to want a lot of paper floating around in order to sort of keep control of student notes that might be in with those papers and floating around. So we procured 9 by 12-inch whiteboards for the students to use. And in subsequent assessments, those are handed out at the beginning and collected at the end. And those are the only things that are allowed to be out during an assessment. Following this pilot assessment, we send out a post-assessment evaluation. This had the same questions in it as in the pre-assessment. We asked them about the most challenging aspect of using the software. We asked them about speed compared to paper. And a new question, we asked them, how much they enjoyed using the computer for an assessment. This evaluation was distributed using Qualtrics, which is the system that we use for the course evaluations. So these students had seen that platform before. This was nothing new to them. And again, the questions were nearly identical to the pre-assessment questions. Asking the students how quick they thought the computer-based testing would be compared to paper, we see here that on the pre-test for the mock quiz, they thought it would be a little bit faster than paper, and that flipped on the post-assessment, where they thought it would be slower than paper. This is likely due, or at least we believe it likely to be due, to that 15-minute delay we had getting them started. And you'll see a little more of this data in a few minutes. Looking at the open-ended questions, when we did a content analysis of those, we found that over 25% of the students were concerned mostly about some sort of technology glitch. Now, this isn't entirely unwarranted. Historically, there have been some issues in the computer lab area with wireless connectivity. This has subsequently been addressed, but at the time of this survey, that was something that was weighing heavily on the students' minds. Close behind that was their ability to write on the exams. Over 15% of the students were concerned about that, and just over 10% of them were concerned about crossing out options. So we knew going into the pilot that a number of the students really felt strongly about being able to physically interact with a tangible exam in front of them, and that this was something that we'd have to find a way around. Other concerns that they had were simple as preference, acclimation. They weren't used to the system. They didn't know how to navigate within the exam system. They were concerned about software installations or difficulty that they had with that. And when we look at the post-assessment content analysis, we see that their concerns about technology glitches dropped off dramatically. Their concerns about writing on the exam dropped off, although not as dramatically. And their concerns about being able to cross out options actually went up a little bit. Preference considerations also went down, and you'll find that this is consistent with the literature that shows students who have more experience with computer-based testing actually prefer it. Another interesting phenomenon that we see here are these new content areas that crop up over here on the right. The ability to scroll, or the necessity to scroll to see the entirety of the questions, waiting to start, and then concerns that were specific to a particular question or the directions to a particular question. What we're seeing then is that our concerns overall are becoming more specific. They're less concerned with sort of this global, the technology will fail, and more concerned with the specifics of being able to cross out items, being able to scroll, needing to scroll. We went ahead and looked at these items in terms of what concerns of our students we're going to be able to address easily. Being able to write on the exam is something that we think we've addressed with the whiteboards, and being able to cross out options is something that is able to be addressed within ExamSoft. The students clearly didn't know that. Exam navigation really ties in with acclimation. They were concerned about being able to jump back and forth between questions. They were concerned about not being able to do things that in fact they are able to do within the software. But again, the students didn't know that at the time. Issues of waiting to start and software installation are going to fall off once we have all of the students on the same platform with the software installed as of day one. So many of these items are going to be able to be addressed as we go into the full-scale rollout. So what happened next? There was a second quiz with ExamSoft. The students actually came up to the course leadership and myself, said that they enjoyed using ExamSoft for their review and that they'd like to see it used for the remainder of the physiology review quizzes. So the next review quiz was in renal physiology, and this was an identical format. You can see we're regressing toward the mean here. This was only downloaded by 126 and completed by 50% of the class, so more what we were used to seeing historically. Post-assessment, there was another evaluation. This time we kept the items identical to the prior assessment. We did add one new question. We added a question about images. In the first pilot assessment, we had embedded the images within the question. In the second assessment, we had attached the images to the question so that they were presented as a pop-up window. And we were really concerned about how the students preferred seeing the images, especially the students who were on iPads. We felt that this was important in terms of promoting best practices for exam creation coming up into the new curriculum. So now we've got 3 data points that we can look at. We've got the pre-assessment mock quiz, we have the first post-assessment evaluation, and we have the second post-assessment evaluation. We see here with the pre-test in blue, asking here about student perception of speed compared to paper. In red is our first post-assessment, and you see how we have a nice right shift there where the students believe it to be a bit slower. That was not statistically significant with a p-value of 0.29. What was significant is our second post-assessment evaluation shown here in green, where the students, once they've had 2 experiences, one of which didn't have a 15-minute delay, now find computer-based testing to be significantly faster than paper. You'll remember on the 2 post-assessment evaluations, we asked students to rate how well they enjoyed using the computer for the test. And you see here that we have a statistically significant improvement in students' enjoyment of computer-based testing, significant at the 0.01 p-value. The prior one was at a less than 0.01 p-value. So what can we conclude from all of this? Most of our conclusions are things that we knew going into it just from what's in the literature. We know that students worry about technology failures. And again, we've seen this in the literature. Deutsch et al. In 2012 published a study from Leipzig Medical School which showed that technology concerns remain even after a successful implementation of computer-based testing. And then earlier in 2011 at Heidelberg, they showed that nearly 10% of their students voluntarily chose paper over computer-based testing strictly for the technology concerns. In that study, they gave their students the option of computer or paper with the caveat that once they had chosen, they had to justify their rationale for why they had chosen one or the other. So nearly 10% chose based on technology. In that same study, nearly a quarter of the students chose paper strictly because of the need to write on the examinations, and that was something that was mirrored here. Our students ahead of time said that they needed to be able to write on the assessments. We saw that come up as a theme again and again. Students perceive computer-based testing as faster than paper. We saw that in our study, but we've also seen it in the literature. The Canadian Medical Education Journal had a study out of Sri Lanka that showed that 70% of their students thought computer-based testing was a more efficient use of time than paper. Now, the compounder here with this and other studies that have shown students find computer-based testing to be faster is that some of these earlier studies in computer-based testing were heavily image-based. They were laboratory practicals, where the paper-based exams involved rotating from multiple stations. So students would have a timer that would go off every 3 minutes. They would move to the next station. They had no control over how long they spent at each question. Whereas with the computer-based testing, they now have that under their control. So it's a little dicey to look at the historical data and say that this is really a trend that's been perceived over time, because those early studies really have a strong confounding factor. We also saw that students acclimate rapidly to computer-based testing. Schrader in 2006 showed that there was a considerable increase in preference with exposure to computer-based testing in the context of a physiology lab. Deutsch in 2012 at Leipzig, that we talked about before, showed that students will more heavily endorse computer-based testing after a single exposure. Now, we found in ours that it really took 2, but keep in mind that that first exposure was laden with some difficulties. And then finally, the encouraging finding for me was that students' qualitative concerns grow more specific with experience. This is good, because the more specific the concerns are, the easier they're going to be for us to address. It's difficult to address sort of a generalized angst about technology will fail me, and it's much easier to address concerns that they don't know how to navigate through the test. So where does this leave us? This is really the heart of why I'm doing all of this, is to look at the evaluation data and see how it's going to help us inform the full-scale rollout. We had a very successful pilot, but what can we do to make sure that the full-scale rollout is even more successful? Well, the first thing we need to do is to revise our mock quiz. It needs to be more orientation and less evaluation. We need to use the mock quiz as an opportunity to get the students to interact with the various features of ExamSoft. They need to flag a question. They need to jump between questions. They need to see how to cross out items. They need to know how to do these things during the mock quiz so that that's there when they finally get to a real assessment. We need to require the mock quiz at orientation. This is going to get rid of some of that 15-minute lag and also make sure that our students are properly oriented to the software. Now, this requirement is going to be much easier in the implementation than it was in the pilot, because the students are getting their iPads from us, they're coming to an iPad orientation that we're offering, and they will be told at that time to use the mock quiz on the iPad. So we have the ability to control that a little more tightly. And again, giving the students this mock quiz up front and telling them that they will be using ExamSoft up front is going to be able to decrease the anxiety that they feel about computer-based testing. Schultz and McIntosh, in a study in psychology, showed that students have less anxiety about computer-based testing when they're told about it early on. If they were changed from paper-based testing to computer-based testing, they experienced significantly more anxiety about the computer-based test, independent of their anxiety for computers or their test anxiety. So by telling them in advance that this is how they're going to be taking their assessments, we should be able to reduce any anxiety that they have. We need to make sure that we have 2 formative assessments prior to the first higher stakes assessment in the new curriculum. And finally, we need to continue the use in the pre-clerkship curriculum. That means that the first-year students will be using ExamSoft throughout, but we need to make sure that the students who participated in the pilot also continue to use ExamSoft. Again, trying to build that bridge between the first 2 years despite the change in the curriculum. And that's what I have for the starter. I'd like to leave time for questions and comments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Veronica. We appreciate that presentation. I'd just like to remind everybody that if you would like to pose a question to Veronica, please go ahead and type those questions in the question area of the GoToWebinar control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. You go ahead and type those in. I'll read them out loud and give Veronica a chance to respond. Okay, let's go ahead and just jump right in. The first question that we have is, let's see, have you developed best practices for images, especially for iPad?
That's difficult. Again, asking the students what their preferences were. We also had faculty who were involved in that first pilot. In advance of the students receiving their iPads in August, faculty who will be heavily involved in the revised curriculum received iPads this last academic year. And so we had a number of them present and also taking these physiology review quizzes. And that has led us to the conclusion that, especially on the iPad, attaching the image to the question so it can be used as a pop-up was the preferred method of display.
Thank you. Next question we have is, how different is remote deletion from reverse download?
I'm not familiar with reverse download. I
I'm not
apologize.
entirely, yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm not entirely familiar with reverse download as well. However, I will say that the remote deletion, is probably a little bit more secure way, a manner of taking care of that issue. But we can definitely follow up with that question via email. Bear with me as I look for a couple more questions here. Just one second. Okay, next question is, what were the broadband or Wi-Fi needs for the original quiz taking?
Because many of the students had downloaded the assessment in advance, and because they don't need to upload it until, well, they don't need to upload it immediately following the quiz. They can upload it later. And we discovered that many of the students who had brought their own device did not immediately upload the assessment after the review session was over, that they were uploading it later that day or the next day when they had access to Wi-Fi other than in the lecture hall. So I'm not sure what the bandwidth capability was in that room. That would be something for our technical folks to answer. But we did not run into problems with connectivity that day, even though historically we've had issues in that room.
Great, thank you. Next question is, do you use free response questions? If so, did you have to revise the format from previous years to be more appropriate for computer-based testing? Did you ask students to draw figures in the past?
No, that's not something that we have used in the past. Our class size is 188 students, and in some cases we have an additional 63 physician assistant students joining us for some of our coursework. So the use of free response questions has really been limited in the past, and certainly where it has occurred, it's been text-based only. In cases where there are more project-based work or more where students have been asked to produce a paper or a diagram or a mind map, those have been done in small group settings where the small group mentors are grading them or scoring them. And that's something that we're working on right now, is using the rubric features to score those types of items rather than putting them in as free response.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how will you ensure that faculty, as opposed to students, adopt the use of ExamSoft?
Well, with the new curriculum and everything being integrated, we have groups of faculty working very closely together from the beginning. We're offering them as much support as we possibly can to get into ExamSoft. They're developing their assessments going forward sort of from the ground up. They're getting together and each faculty member is submitting their test questions, then they're working as a group to try to come up with more integrated questions. We're taking those questions once the group has completed those, and our office, the Office of Medical Education, is typing them into ExamSoft for them. Then we're working with each of the system leaders, so each of the block directors, on how to use ExamSoft so that they will be able to construct their assessments and release them there. So the number of faculty that we have that actually need to use ExamSoft, we're paring it down as small as we can, and we're giving them as much administrative support as we can in using it. So I guess those are the two features that we're kind of honing in on to make sure that faculty will use it.
Great, thank you. I know that's always a touchy subject, trying to get the buy-in from faculty across an entire program, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is, can you please explain your previous statement regarding the use of a grading rubric? Is this feature available within the software?
Stephanie, you might have to help me out here because I know that we're pilot testing rubrics for ExamSoft. If it's not available full scale right now, it is coming soon. But yes, there are rubrics available within ExamSoft. So you can score items that are entered within ExamSoft, But my understanding of the feature, at least the way we're using it currently, is you can also upload files that can then be scored using the rubric. So this may allow us in the future to capture even things like OSCEs. So we'll be able to get the same sort of category tagging with items that are graded by rubric as we can from our multiple choice testing. But that's one that if you're using ExamSoft, talk to your rep about.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Veronica. So right now, our rubrics capability is available. In the next month, we'll be releasing many more features that will have different capabilities that our current edition has. But yeah, so the benefit is, especially for medical or health sciences types of programs, is that you have that rubric available for things like OSCEs, clinical situations, clinical evaluations, that sort of thing. And all of those little boxes or dimensions, if you will, within each rubric can be directly tied to a learning outcome that you have in your category structure, which enables the program to still harvest that data once the evaluation or assessment is complete.
Which I think is really exciting, because historically, with the best curriculum mapping, there's still kind of a black box around clinical skills development, because it's very hard to capture that data. And I think the rubrics are going to fill that gap.
Absolutely. Next question is, did you also run a pre and post survey for faculty too?
We did not. Again, keeping with our principles here, the number of faculty involved is as small as possible. And in this case, the course director was involved and the section leader was involved, but only tangentially. They created the exam questions, but then we went ahead and uploaded them, and the course director was the one that created the assessment and released it. So there were really only 2 people that were involved in this, and there was no need for a pre and post assessment because we were in constant communication throughout the process.
Great. Next question is almost a follow-up to the previous question about faculty buy-in, but this one is, how do you encourage faculty to utilize tags within ExamSoft? And for those of you not familiar with the terminology of tags, I think the questioner means the actual learning outcomes, making sure each question within the item bank or the exam is then tagged to a specific learning outcome or objective.
And that's a very good question, because you've hit on the weakness in our structure. By having the OME enter the exam questions, we're not able to capture the tags that they might like associated with it. So we do need to have the faculty tagging their own questions. Luckily for us, when I arrived here 2 years ago, we had 2 faculty members here who were very excited to get ExamSoft in and being used. And those are the 2 faculty that we've got early on as our block leaders. So they're excited to be using it. By the time we run into faculty that are more likely to resist, if you will, picking my words carefully in case we have any of them here, we will have had 2 blocks that have already used ExamSoft. We've already had the tagging. We'll be able to show, using the very robust reporting features, how that tagging plays out in terms of the data we're able to collect. We'll have students that are used to receiving those kinds of reports, and so there will be some sort of grassroots pressure on faculty to be sure to tag their questions. We've captured as much as we can working with the instructional designers as to what the learning objectives are, what the learning outcomes are, and trying to create a category tree that will capture as much of that as possible, so that when they sit down to do the tagging, it's a matter of selecting them, not creating them. But much of that work is still in front of us for faculty that may be more resistant.
And as a follow-up to that follow-up question, this next question is, did you share the results of your pilot research with faculty? And if so, did this help with their adoption of ExamSoft?
Yes and yes. we shared the results with the deans and then with the faculty who are involved in the preclinical curriculum development. And what we shared was many of the graphs that you just saw, but also the reports that were then generated. So the reports that were generated for the students, for the course director, coming out of ExamSoft, and those were very well received by faculty. A number of folks asking how they can get that kind of data on their classes that they're teaching farther down the line. So I think that's going to be our biggest point of buy-in, to get the faculty working with the categories more.
All right, it looks like at this point I have one more question in my bank. I'm going to make this a last call. If anybody else has questions, please go ahead and take the opportunity now to enter them in. Otherwise, we're going to go through this last one and then call it an afternoon. Last question, and again, this is another faculty buy-in type question, Dr. Michaelsen. How do you get faculty to adhere to deadlines when creating new exams?
How do you get faculty to adhere to deadlines? You could just stop the question there, and I think that would be just as appropriate. For whatever reason, and I've been through 2 of these curriculum reforms now, but for whatever reason, our faculty, as we've gone through this particular curriculum reform, are largely compliant with the deadlines we've set. As part of the curricular revision, we're having every single session in the new curriculum is mapped out. It's mapped out with its learning objectives and its instructional methods and the pedagogy that's behind it. So there are worksheets being generated for each session, and those are handled by our instructional designer. And what I'm hearing from her is that there's a couple of people that are holdouts, but for the most part, and 90+% are turned in on time and are complete on time. So we've had very good luck getting faculty to be compliant with deadlines, and I suspect, given the data that they're hoping to gather and how excited they are about that, that we should have pretty good luck. Now that said, with ExamSoft, you can give the assessment and then post hoc go back and tag questions and still capture that data. So if or when we run into issues with faculty not having their questions tagged in time, we can still go ahead and give the assessment. We just won't be able to capture the data immediately. We'll have to wait until those questions are tagged in order to capture the data. So we do have a little more leeway with ExamSoft than they do with, say, getting everything up on Blackboard before the students arrive.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Veronica, that the tagging capability is retroactive. So if you need to go back in, or if you decide 3 years from now to implement a new curriculum and you have an entirely new category structure, you can always go back in and still obtain that data from the past 3 years if necessary. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. I'd really like to thank Dr. Michaelsen for being here today. This is a great presentation. We hope it was enjoyable and informative for you. Just as a quick reminder, we have recorded this webinar. We will be sending out a link to the recording and a PDF copy of the presentation within the next 48 hours, so please be watching your inboxes for that, and feel free to share with your peers or colleagues as you would like. We just really like to reiterate one more time, please, if you have a couple of seconds, please fill out that survey that's going to pop up for you here in just a second. We would really appreciate your feedback. With that, again, thank you so much for being here during your afternoon. We know you're all very busy. We appreciate your time. Have a great afternoon, and thank you so much.